and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer, really, standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Please remember to visit the website podcastufo.com for past episodes, blogs, and forums. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello, everyone. This is Martin Willis, your host, and we have Alejandro Rojas coming up with the news in just a few. Tonight we have Erica Lukes, Utah MUFON director, and she's going to be talking about her new show called UFO Audit, which is coming up, first show this Friday. So we're going to talk to her about that and much more, of course. Well, I want to thank everyone for their support. And if you have not subscribed to us and you want to hear the second hour, simply go to our podcast site, which is podcastufo.com, and you'll see right on the right sidebar a real easy click and sign up. You only have to do that once, and you get a private link that you can put into iTunes or virtually any media player. And it's really easy to set up with an iPhone. And speaking of support, I've actually had a life change. My grueling job, my grueling commute has been changed to consulting work, if any. In other words, I'm unemployed. So my pipe dream is to make this show my focus. I know that is kind of a pipe dream, but I know there are a lot of you listeners out there, and if each of you could support my show for $1 or more, well, by golly, I could actually do that, make this my focus. And I think as soon as possibly next week or the week after, I'm going to be going to College Park, Maryland, and it's going to be a great live show. I'd love to do more things like that. So help if you can, but if you can't help, that's okay. We still love each and every one of you. Well, anyone that signs up for a $10 or more per month, I will happily send you a free T-shirt. And speaking of that, you know, they haven't been real popular, I have to admit. I do have a graphic designer working on new designs. I'm going to post different designs that he gives me, and I'll post them up on Facebook and on the website. And I'll let you decide. I'll maybe set up a survey or something. Again, we still love every single listener out there. Really love doing the show. And now we have Alejandro Rojas. But Alejandro, I want to talk to you about your last guest, Ron Regier.
Yes, Martin. Let's do that.
So that was, I help Alejandro out on his show. I help him with the news on that. And so I listened to the show, and Ron Regier is a fascinating man. What a great show that is. And that's at openminds.tv. Podcast is right on that site that came out last Monday. I suggest to any of the listeners to the show, check that out. It's a great show with Ron. He was fascinating.
Yeah, he's great. And it's kind of funny because, I mean, his stories, if you wouldn't know any better, I don't think you would believe it. But I've known Ron for many years. I mean, ever since I've been in MUFON, he was a director, I think, in Utah. He was on the board. I think now he's some sort of functional director. So he's always been around. And an aerospace engineer, and here and there over the years, I've asked him, talked to him about different things. You know, a lot of UFO researchers will mention him when they write about things because he's been associated to so many things along as the years have gone by. And it's so interesting how his career has been able to mix with his interest in UFOs and how he's kind of been part of these really important cases over the years. And I always, he was like probably one of the first people I wanted to interview when I started my show. And I just can't believe I haven't sat down and talked to him about all of this until recently. But a lot of people don't know about his fascinating background. And he's not the type to really hype himself. He's around at these conferences and stuff. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of people at these conferences where you strike up conversations with someone maybe you've seen 3 years in a row at the UFO Congress, and you ask about him. Oh, yeah, I'm an engineer, there, or sure, I used to work at NORAD and we used to see some weird stuff. You know, these amazing people who are interested in this field.
Hey, wait a minute. Was he at the North Carolina conference?
I can't remember. Most likely, I can't remember for sure,
to be honest. A tall guy. There was a tall guy that was some type of engineer that I spoke with there, and I'm wondering if it might be...
He probably was. He goes to a lot of these often, and some of you who go to these may recognize him because he often has his dog with him that helps him, I think, with seizures. But he's often got a dog with him for those purposes at these conferences. But he's at a lot of them. Great guy, very, very interesting.
Wow, awesome. Well, so we're here to talk about news. So what's going on with the UFO? Yeah, what's going on with UFO news this week?
Well, I just finished my story on these Arctic UFOs. I'm sure you've seen the story because it's all over the place. In fact, I'm going to cover a couple stories that are big in the media, international media, and this is one of them. And I waited a little while to write about it because I knew there would be more work done, and I knew it would be a lot of work for me to research everything about them so I can write a concise story about what's going on here. But have you seen these photos? They're really amazing, of these alleged photos of UFOs taken from what appears to be a periscope of a U.S. Navy sub.
Yes. Wasn't John Greenwald involved in releasing these somehow?
Yeah, exactly. So what happened that there's this researcher, Alex Mistretta, and he says that he received these photos from an anonymous source in Europe. Then he had heard that a French newspaper, paranormal magazine actually, called Top Secret, had published them. And so he looked at what information they had. It was similar to what he had. And so he decided to release these pictures on the Black Vault with information about what he had so that John Greenwald and others could help him investigate these photos. His anonymous source told him that these images were taken from the USS Trepang. Funny enough, Trepang, I guess, is a word for like a sea cucumber or something like this. But it's a real Navy sub. In March of 1971, when they were near Iceland, in between Iceland and an island called Jan Mayen up in the Arctic, and that there was an admiral on board called Dean Reynolds, and there was also an officer, John Kilka, who is the one who saw what appeared to be what he called an accident. So I guess appeared to see this UFO, even though there's several of them, crash and I guess having some kind of mechanical issue and crashing or something like that, or being shot at. It's kind of vague. So really interesting. He posts these stories with the pictures. They quickly then went to research what's going on with these images. So they got a hold of Steve Murillo, who runs the UFO and Paranormal Meetup in Los Angeles. And the reason they contacted him is that he was a Navy pilot, and they asked him if he could help them get in contact with these two gentlemen, Admiral... I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong name for the Admiral, too. His name was Sackett, Dean Reynolds Sackett. So Admiral Sackett and Officer Kilka. And they were able to get a hold of him. So Marilla called Sackett, and Mistretta was able to get a hold of Officer Kilka. They said, yeah, we were on the Trepang in March of 1971, and we were in the Arctic in that area. And John Greenwald was able to actually verify that those guys were on the ship separately, even before they contacted him, and that the ship was in the area. However, they said, we did not see anything strange. We don't know what those images are. And as far as we know, nobody saw anything strange. So the story was false. And then Mistretta has said, it turns out that, the information I got from my source is false. So who knows what's going on here?
Oh, John really? So this is a little turn of events here.
Well, here's the problem. Even though the national media and everybody has picked it up, nobody is telling the story about the investigation that Greenwald and Mistretta and Murillo have done. They've done a lot of great investigative work here. But that's not being covered, unfortunately. And they've done some great work. In fact, Greenwald went on to do some research. He thought the objects looked like they might be balloons. He also found on the website where he was able to trace where the trepang was to confirm it was in that area. He said that when it was out there, they were doing testing and scientific experiment. So he looked up test balloons. Sure enough, he found some pictures of these gigantic balloons that looked very similar to what is in the images. I went to Wikipedia and looked at these balloons, and I found some similar ones myself. Now, these images are from the early 1900s of these weird balloons. I nor Greenwald could find any from the 70s. But, I think Greenwald's kind of cracked the case here. I think that's what these are, kind of test balloons that they fire at, and they practiced shooting down.
Oh, because there is one that looks like it's exploding or something.
Yeah, there's a couple images of these things exploding and sinking into the ocean, and that's what makes them so spectacular and wonderful. They're really cool-looking pictures. But none of that has been completely confirmed yet, like, where they were from or when. Even if it's possible they're completely fabricated, photoshopped hoaxes. But I think Greenwald seems to be on the right track. If you look at the balloons in the images compared to these alleged UFO photos, I think that he's figured it out. So really cool investigation, great work. Unfortunately, the investigation isn't being covered, which I think really kind of sucks, to put it bluntly, because they try to portray UFO researchers as these, like I wrote in my story, wild-eyed believers, when actually a lot of them are really good researchers who are looking for the truth. And there's some great research that's been done here. In fact, Mistretta is going to talk more about it on July 21st. Murillo, holds this meetup in Los Angeles, and Mistretta is going to be there to talk about it. So people in the LA area who want to meet these guys can do that. And we've got a link in our story to that meetup. So that's the story.
Awesome. Well, that's good investigative work by everyone.
Yep.
It really is. Okay, so what else is happening?
What else is happening is another story that's making the news. It's on CNN and everywhere, and this is the Welsh government replying to UFO questions in Klingon. We talked about this, I think, a little bit on my show, but yes. I have a little more information. I interviewed Nick Pope yesterday. It'll be on our next UFO report on YouTube about this. But what happened is this Welsh Assembly minister in the Assembly for Clwyd West, he asked a question, and about UFOs. He said, our Cardiff airport, how many UFOs have been seen above it? Has the Welsh government worked with the Ministry of Defense regarding UFOs? Has the Welsh government looked into UFOs? And the response has been to make fun of him and trash this guy. So, right. A lot of people have said, oh, that's funny, that's great, Welsh government's so cool, especially because Comic-Con's going on. But really, it's really condescending and not very cool of them. They're obviously not taking him serious at all. So they replied in Klingon. They said, I don't know, some kind of crazy Klingon stuff. But what it means is the minister will reply in due course. However, this is a non-devolved manner. And we asked, Nick Pope about that. He says what he means by a non-devolved matter is that the Ministry of Defense does not consult the Welsh government. It's kind of above them. And they don't, go downwards. They don't tell you, hey, Welsh government, here's what we're working on. So they're kind of already alluding to, like Nick Pope says, to passing the buck, which is something he says he did when he worked for the Ministry of Defense. And that is common, that they're probably going to say, we don't know, ask the Ministry of Defense. For which, of course, the Ministry of Defense has answered and talked about that issue often. Unfortunately, one of the Assembly sources, and anonymous assembly sources, had kind of replied off the record. And he says the only extraterrestrial life seen near Cardiff recently seems to be Darren Miller. Perhaps instead of spending time and wasting government resources asking questions about UFO, he should be fighting for the very real concerns of his constituents.
Oh, you bloke, you.
That prissy British. Oh, man. But it was because of his constituents. He was asking these questions because they were coming from his constituents. So kind of frustrating. Nick Pope replied in a tweet. He says, replying to an assemblyman's question on the UFOs in Klingon is a great way to ridicule the subject. I did similar things at the MOD. Kapla. Kapla is another Klingon term for success. And in fact, I have him do this. If you want to see Nick Pope speaking Klingon, you can watch our interview that we'll have out on Friday. But he essentially says, he called it spin and dirty tricks, that when he was working for the MOD about UFOs, they would do things like this to make fun of UFOs. However, in the background, they were taking the reports very, very seriously, although they were pretending not to. Something else I put in my story that I think is very interesting is that in 2012, Huffington Post wrote about a poll that was done in the UK about UFOs, and they found that 52% believe UFO evidence has been covered up because widespread knowledge of their existence would threaten government stability. So, I mean, if you look at this Welsh story or even this Navy story, it was the UK media that picked it up. The UK media even references our website practically on a weekly basis these days. And these are some of their bigger papers like the Mirror, the Daily Express. Their newspapers out there are certainly more tabloid-like, but they write about UFOs much more over there, it seems, especially per capita, than we do over here. So UK people are really into UFOs. So hopefully, I mean, there's a backlash. I just don't think that these politicians should be making light of real concerns from their citizens. Yeah, it's just, it's par for the course. It's status quo. And, it's kind of funny that the UK has so many reports or so many, articles, only because of the fact that, when I speak to people from over there, they say, well, we never get to see UFOs. It's always cloudy or rainy. Not always, but, a lot. Yeah, which is a good point. I mean, it's difficult to know because, there are some organizations out there, but it's difficult because it's not really apples to tell if they have more reports or not. But we do know in our own country that the sunnier areas do seem to have more sighting reports. So it's entirely possible. And it could be why they're so interested in other people's sightings, because a lot of the stories they run over there are U.S. sighting reports. So, for instance, when we talked about this recently about June having a spike in sightings. They ran with that story out there, and I don't even know if the American media picked it up, but the UK media picked it up like crazy, which was really cool. So they're really interested in sightings, even if they don't happen in the UK. Not like the US, where we could really give a damn what happens in other countries for the most part.
Good point there. So you have one more. We'll have to make it a little bit short because we're running a little bit late here.
I'll do it really quick. Speaking of Americans not giving a damn about what happens in other countries, here's a great UFO story from another country. This is just a story about some Turkish pilots who recall some UFO sightings. They're commercial airline pilots, essentially, who had a couple really cool experiences. One pilot just said that, he was up and him, along with four aircraft in total, saw this extremely bright light. They couldn't even look at it directly. It was so incredibly bright. So really neat story there. And then another story from another pilot who said they saw some multicolor lights that flew around and eventually turned into a white ball before disappearing. So really cool sightings. And funny enough, the space editor, I think he writes for MSNBC these days, but he's written for a lot, space.com and everything. Jim Oberg replied to my story. He does that sometimes. And it was kind of funny. He says, And your reason for thinking the story was significant without providing a date, time, or location of it was what exactly? Especially on an air route passing close to the Baikonur Cosmodrome. So his point being that, in the flight path is a very popular place where they launch rockets. And that's a great point. But, of course, he's being silly about his first question. But the reason I bring that up, because it's a great question. Why do we care? Because they're commercial pilots. And I think you might agree, and certainly our readers agree, that stories from commercial airline pilots are very interesting because these are people who are flying and up in the air, quite a bit. In fact, Obama's, pilot for when he was a candidate came out speaking about UFOs fairly recently, and that was a big story. People just really like to hear from airline pilots. And what was interesting about Obama's pilot is that he said most pilots believe in UFOs, and these two pilots say they believe in it as well. So I think that's very interesting. What do you think?
Absolutely. I seem to talk quite a bit about Seth Shostak because I did, when I was debating him on UFOs way back in show number 21 or 22, I can't remember. I brought that up about, these are people more like trained observers, like astronauts and pilots and things like that. And he said, absolutely not. They're no different than anyone else. And, it makes no difference. I was kind of shocked by that because I would think anyone, flying a plane would really need to know what's going on up there and really pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really frustrating. I mean, it's someone like Seth Shostak will discount pilots, even though pilots are in the air. That's where they're spending their career. The rest of us don't have a career looking up in the sky. Mm-hmm. But Shostak will also say, well, why don't astronomers see UFOs, and why aren't they into UFOs? And they are.
Guess what? They are. Yeah.
I did a talk in Roswell about this where it was really astronomers who started the modern-day research into UFOs. So there, Mr. Shostak.
Yeah, there you go. Well, hey, thanks so much. We ran a little long, but it was fun. It was good. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I have one more thing to mention. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
But speaking of astronomers and UFOs, Clyde Tombaugh's in the news a lot because he's the one who discovered Pluto, and he was one of those astronomers who saw UFOs. And there was a Life magazine story about it in the 50s, which was a huge deal and really rekindled the public's interest in UFOs. But that's an interesting story that you see out there in the news these days because of everything going on with Pluto.
Right, and I hope the listener out there has checked out the images of Pluto. It is really something to see something like that. Showing really cool. Some of the mountain ranges, and it's an icy planet, but boy, it's really actually great to be able to see that.
Amazing stuff.
It's amazing what mankind can do, really, if you think about it. It takes 4 hours for the signal the speed of light to reach the Earth.
Yeah. Call me a Pollyanna, but I think humans are pretty cool sometimes.
I'm there with you, man. All right. Well, thanks a lot, and I'll be talking to you next week.
Okay, talk to you later.
All right, so everyone hang in there. We'll be right back after this quick music break with Erica Lukes. Erica Lukes. How are you? Did you unmute your mic, Erica?
Yeah. Oh, I think I did now. That's me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. This only happens on live radio, by the way.
I know, of course.
Welcome to the
wait
show.
for the cat to come in and pull the mic down like she did last time. So,
welcome to the show.
thank you.
Yes, and we follow. I don't know if you follow each other on Facebook. Whatever you do on Facebook, we do. So we've had some nice little back and forths for a while, and so I was excited to have you on and talk about who you are, what you do, and we got some time to fill. So let's talk about how you got interested in the topic to begin with.
I've always been interested in it, and I remember when I was 6 years old, standing in my school library, and I saw a book with a UFO on the cover, and I picked it up, and it was like this attraction. And from there on out, I just read everything I could find. I did a lot of research into the paranormal phenomena, and I was drawn to it. I'm a very intuitive person and an artist by trade, and so it just came naturally to me to want to learn more about something like this.
Now, so you started out that young? Are you saying, now, did you have any siblings that shared your interest or anything?
I was an only child, and clearly maybe that explains a lot. Who knows? But I was always creative and imaginative, and I always had this yearning for studying this type of thing because I knew there was something much deeper going on, and I felt connected to it.
I see. It's funny. My son's an only child, and I think that a lot of times, and I know a few others, these people seem to be very creative because, you're spending a lot of time with yourself as you're young and, entertaining yourself. And, there's a certain creative element that seems to follow along with the only child,
You're not kidding. Just ask my mom that. She would vouch for that. But, I think it was great for me. I mean, I used to put on little plays in my bedroom and just sing and dance, and I loved that. And I think because that's the way I processed things, that perhaps I was a little bit more open to intuition and the paranormal and UFOs and things like that. So it's always been fascinating. And I remember picking up communion when I was in high school, and that just sent me reeling.
Yeah, it's funny how many times that same story you're just saying right there, not high school, but there's so many people that have been on this show that book has, really changed the way they think. And I've never even, I have the book sitting on my shelf, but until just recently, like last Friday, I had no time to do anything, and now I have all the time in the world. And
well, no, because you're going on a tour. You're going across country to come visit me.
Okay. All right. Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
Now, I am going to say that anyone in the chat room, if you'd like to pose a question for Erica, you can go ahead. And Erica's actually in there, so be kind to her. And also, if anyone would like to call into the show, our number, as always, is 603-967-4030. You know what I just thought of? I should post that on the website or somewhere so I don't have to keep saying it over and over again. But, Erica, we do occasionally we get a call during a show. Not a lot of people are active in the chat room usually, but don't call. So don't hold out for that. You can say whatever you want to say. Time goes on. You go through high school. You read that. Did you continue on that path? I'm sure you had careers and perhaps college or whatever study you did. How did all that go?
I started studying classical voice when I was 16, and I was in a lot of different bands in Utah and performed, did that for a career. So my background was vocal performance, and then I became a master Pilates instructor and opened a business, and I've had a business for 15 years, teaching Pilates and certifying Pilates instructors. And the whole time I've been researching and reading everything I could get my hands on about the UFO phenomena, about abductions, and the paranormal as well, because I've had an interesting experience with the paranormal, and I lived in a haunted house. It was very, very cool. So I've had lots of interesting experiences around me, and it's been fantastic.
Well, I have to, I know this is a UFO show, but I'm going to have to ask you about the haunted house.
Okay.
So.
And I liked it. It was the coolest thing. We moved into, I'm not even going to tell you how old I was. That's just too depressing. But we moved into a house that was 100 years old. And at the time, my husband was working late at night. And so I would just see things. The toilet lid would be up the seat, which was odd. And I would notice that, literally a candle would just fly off the shelf. All of these things started to happen, and I thought it was a little odd and kept excusing what was going on around me and rationalizing it. And then one night I was going to bed, walked through the kitchen, and I noticed a man leaning against the counter. And I thought that, okay, it's my husband. Went into bed, and he was in bed, asleep. So I immediately woke him up, and I just said, "Oh, my Lord, I've been seeing this. This is what's been happening." And he said, "Thank you. I've been not purposefully saying anything, and I wanted to see what you had to say, because I've been seeing a man in our house for months."
Wow.
So it was a really interesting experience. I think we were both intuitive, but then we would have, I kind of panicked. I thought, "Oh, my Lord, where are we living?" And so I called out a group, and they investigated. In fact, they did several investigations and, caught the typical EVPs, saw apparitions. It was very, very cool. Whatever was there was definitely some sort of, I felt like a benevolent force. And I have to say, when I left the house, I was very sad.
Well, since we're talking ghosts already, I'm going to just tell a quick...
Oh, dear.
a quick ghost story. And that has only come up, I think, once in 159 shows here. But anyway, my father owned a house in southern Maine, and it was a very early house, around early 1700s. And the house had already been moved once, and it had a history, a really interesting history not kind of a sad history, but it was attacked by Native Americans or Indians, whatever you want to say, and they killed the children, which was really sad, and they took the woman away, and in the middle of the night she got up. This is a true story. She got up in the middle of the night, and she found a knife, she stabbed the Indian and the whatever it was with her shelter or whatever, and escaped and went back to the house. Well, that was a story about that. Well, my father owned this house, and my sister had an operation, and she said, "Dad, I saw a little girl." And he says, "Yeah, I see her all the time." And all these weird things they'd see. My sister described it as a little girl in a white dress that looked like old-fashioned. And she'd see, and then she wouldn't see it, and then she'd see through it, and, on and on. So I didn't pay, I said, wow, and all that. Here I am in, like, high school or something, so I didn't really pay that much attention to it. Well, the land was sold, a big mall came in, and the house was moved again down the street about a half a mile or so. So I stopped in there one day because it was an antique shop, and I got to talk to the antique dealer. And I finally got up the courage, and I said, "Has anyone ever talked about this place being haunted?" And he looks at me, he goes, "Do you mean the little girl in the white dress?" I mean, that's pretty amazing to me. And
that is incredible.
And so he said, "Go talk to the accountants. They've seen her too." So there was accountants inside, and I went in and talked to him, and one of them started laughing. She goes, "I don't want to talk about it."
Isn't that incredible? When the house that I lived in was so active. I mean, I would have, and these are really skeptical people, come over. They were my friends, lots of them engineers. So they would, yeah, whatever. And, pretty soon they'd have an experience, and it was a little shocking for them. But after, I lived there for a while, the house was on TV, and it was in a local magazine. And I had somebody Facebook me, actually, and said, "Oh, did you live at such and such an address?" Because I lived next door to that house back when I was 10 years old, and my girlfriend and I were down in the basement, and we had an experience that scared us so much that we ran to our bishop, And the bishop said to never talk about it again, and here we are.
Wow. I know the listener out there comes to listen to the show for UFOs, so you have to forgive me. But, the thing that comes up occasionally is people talk, where there's ghosts, there's UFOs, there's Bigfoot, there's, cryptoids, there's all kinds of weird things going on at once. I don't know if any of that's true or not, if there's any type of relation, but there is some type of answer for what's happening. And I think, it's elusive as UFOs in general, but also, I don't know if they'll ever be figured out. Same thing as UFOs. I hope they will, but I don't know if they actually will or not.
I think that for me, the more I learn about this subject, the more I probably lean towards saying that this phenomena is, the paranormal, the ghosts. This could be connected with the UFO phenomena. When you're looking at abductions, many people that have had abduction experiences will see the orbs by their bed. And, so the bottom line is we don't know. It's unexplained. And until we're willing to really put effort into it and serious research and quit debating whether they're here or not, I think there's enough evidence to say they are. So now what are we going to do about it? How are we going to research this phenomena and work together? Right.
So, Erica, you are now the director of MUFON of Utah?
I am state director for Utah MUFON, and I love it. There's so much going on in this state. It's just been fun.
I can understand a lot of times we talk about there's more sightings and where there's clearer skies. I think that definitely plays into it when you think of places like England, which we spoke about earlier in the news, how, it's cloudy there a lot, it's rainy there a lot. But in states like California, Arizona, and Utah, I'm sure, Nevada, there's a lot of sunshine, and which means clear skies and probably more sightings.
Right. And I think that we do have a lot of sightings in Utah now. My job as state director is to encourage people to report them.
Yeah.
Because, wow, we have this is Skinwalker Ranch territory.
Oh, right. Now, speaking of that, we've had a couple of guests on recently where two weeks in a row, so I won't belabor it too much, but where we talk about the amount of UFO sightings compared to the actual reports. And I'm sure you see exactly that, right?
Yes, exactly.
And I don't know, we can't fill out reports for people. That's just, they have to do it themselves. And, there's got to be a lot of psychology that goes along with the reason why people won't do that.
I think there is. And I think, some of it is, up until now, it's been really, really hard. Where do you go to report stuff? I know when I had my sightings in Utah, the first thing I did was try to contact the FAA. And I learned that lesson really quickly.
Yeah.
But when you go to the FAA's website, at the time when I went there, they referred you to Bigelow Aerospace and then to New Fork. And so, and the number for Bigelow was out of service. And in New Fork, Peter Davenport was fantastic. But there was nobody here in Utah really actively researching what was going on. So I hope that I can encourage people, not only here but all over, to take the time, go to MUFON, file a report, because this is vital to our research.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about research. Are you active in actually researching cases, or being the director, is that a different type of role?
I do both. It's challenging because I have right now, I'm building up a chapter that was basically defunct. And so I've stepped in, and we had a really small number of members, and I'm rebuilding that, and then I'll get cases and try to research them and run a business and have a family. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of work for MUFON headquarters as well, but it's a work in progress.
Wow. Okay, so I've just been sort of corrected on the chat room. We have a listener in the chat room from South England, and it must be like in the middle of the night there, isn't it? He calls himself... I love Martin. I love that guy. Anyway, so he says it's clear most of the time there, so I take that back. I stand corrected. And so I would be interested to hear... like earlier on in the newscast, we were talking about how there is so many stories about UFOs in the UK press. So it would be interesting to actually find out exactly why and what the general thoughts were there. So
maybe we should go over there. You should go over there on your tour. I
should, yeah, since I'm unemployed. I'll go anywhere the wind blows or the UFOs blow. Float, exactly. I will go. Yeah. So it's 1:40 in the morning. Thanks for joining us over there and listening live. And speaking of that, if you are listening live, you can jump in the chat room. That's at podcastufo.com and ask our guest tonight a question. Again, the phone number, 603-967-4030. And I have to say that a couple of times I've missed calls because a little behind the scenes here, I've got 3 different computers set up. And the calls come in on one that's to my hard right, and sometimes I miss a call. And if I do, I apologize. So, Erica, if you happen to see one pop up and I don't get it, stop what you're saying and say something if you would.
Okay.
Yeah. So you do actually some of the investigating yourself, but a busy life. Most people have busy lives that are involved in MUFON.
We do, and I think an important thing to remember is that this is a volunteer organization. When I first joined MUFON, I was absolutely shocked at the amount of money that people spend from their own personal funds, the time commitments, and the patience and the perseverance that they put into researching this. Most of them never get any attention for their great contributions, and it's something that needs to change, and I really hope people realize that we need volunteers, we need support, we need donations to help us get really great equipment to research this. MUFON, I have loved my experience in MUFON.
And how many years?
I've been there for 2 years.
Oh, 2 years, and you're already the director. Wow.
Well, I'm a quick mover.
Yeah. Yeah. So just a few minutes ago, you mentioned something about a sighting you had. So can you tell us about that?
Yes. It was 2013. I live in an area of Salt Lake, and I have an amazing view. And so I would sit out on my deck and have a barbecue, have the friends over, and I would get, I'd just see the beautiful sunsets. I could tell what aircraft was coming in and all of that, the normal activity. And I'd noticed one night as I was watching the sunset, I'd noticed this bright orange sphere. And I thought, okay, that's very odd. The light was different than it would be if it were a plane. It was amazing. And I watched it for quite some time, grabbed my binoculars. I had some friends over. And then I noticed that there was, a big object, and then it appeared that another one dropped out of the smaller object. The object went around in a circle around the bigger object. And I just sat there like, all righty, really?
Wow.
And to me, we were just in shock. But, then as I looked through the binoculars, there were no discerning. I mean, it was a solid light. I couldn't see any landing lights. And it was pretty shocking. After that, I began to set up my video equipment every night. And almost like clockwork, these objects would appear. And sometimes they would appear from the base of a mountain and move up. And one, this object would move up and just hover. And then it would go away. And then another one would rise up at the same location and hover and then follow the same flight path. And it did it a third time. And you watch this and you just think, oh, my Lord, am I the only person in the world that's seeing this? So that's what set me in motion and it set me on the path of reaching out to New Fork, talking to MUFON, realizing that we need to have some serious investigation here in Utah.
Now, do you still live in the same place you did in 2013?
I do.
And are these things still going on? Is it still happening?
They are, and I wish that I had as much time as I did back then to sit out on the porch. They are. We're still getting reports. Many reports are over the Kennecott copper mines, which I find interesting, and the Ochre Mountains. So they're the same places that I observe these objects. I'm in the process of doing a research project with MUFON called Project Orange, and we are specifically researching the orange orb phenomena.
Is that with Bob Davis? Is that the right person?
It's with Robert Spearing and Terry Ray.
Terry Ray, that's who I was thinking of. Yeah. It's interesting that you just mentioned the copper quarries or whatever it is that you just said, because I'm trying to remember, is it Brown Mountain? Yeah, Brown Mountain Lights. Mm-hmm. The same thing, that's a real hot spot, and there's many sightings over in the Brown Mountain area. And also, it has a high content of copper right in that valley right there. And I'm wondering, I hear you talking about this. There seems to be a link, because I think that's the third time I've heard something about that. Now, it's very, very possible that this could be some type of natural phenomenon that happens because of copper and, say, it's kind of like how you make a battery. You get different elements. You know what? I'm going way out of my field here, and I'm probably going to say something totally wrong. But anyway, it's a possibility that something like that has a natural element to it.
Yeah, I agree with that, and there are people, and of course that's something that we have to rule out when we're investigating. But the thing that is becoming apparent is that these objects are moving with intelligence, and in some cases they're responding to people and a person's awareness of the object. So I think that there might be a little bit more going on, but that's part of the research project, process. How do you definitively say it is not that, so now we move on to this? Right.
Well, that would, when something has an element like that can't be explained, then that's, it moves further and further away from a natural course. Of course it does. Any updates on the July 4th part of Project Orange? That's on the message board.
Oh, and I love that. Thank you for asking that. So right now, Robert Spearing is going through all of the July 4th sightings reports. He's been amazing. And he's almost got all of the states done with the help of my assistant state director. And he's had to put in weather data, really weed out the good cases and cases that are not, cases that would be Chinese lanterns. I hate to even say that. Mm-hmm. But so we're gaining lots of headway there, and then we have to get into the real nuts and bolts of the study and start identifying how the objects are behaving. Is there a specific time of day? Where are the sightings clusters? And one of my tasks is to have a map where I can layer, the mines, mineral content, rare earth content. I would like to do, the military installations, the aeronautical charts, bodies of water. We've had lots of reports of these objects over radio towers. So you could go anywhere with this, and I think we definitely need to start doing some cool stuff with maps and figuring out why these objects are attracted to specific areas.
Now, are there a lot of other sightings of different, I want to say crafts, or do you hear about the triangle sightings out there?
We do. And they're, we get a few of those. Honestly, 80% of the case reports are the orbs.
Really? That high?
Yeah. Yep.
Amazing. And on a regular basis, say, we just, as happenstance is, we had someone from MUFON last week. I'm not doing this on purpose. It just happened like that. And I just want to know, he was saying that I believe he said they get about 16 to 30 reports a month in that state, which is pretty high for, because it's a small state. Do you know approximately how many reports roll in per month?
Oh, boy. I am very sad to say that it's between 8 and 10.
Uh-huh. Well, again, statistically, if you look at it that way, there's probably a heck of a lot of them happening and only 8 or 10 roll in.
That's one of the things. It's raising public awareness and letting people know that there is a place to file a report. And a really cool thing is that MUFON has been working very hard to revamp the CMS and the way people can input reports. I think that changing that up and making it more accessible will be helpful, and we'll see our numbers increase with reports.
I think the average person today, with all the information coming at them in every which way, the average person has a shorter attention span than ever. So, yeah, you'd have to, anything you're doing today, you have to keep that in mind and, make things as simple as possible.
That's kind of sad, isn't it?
Technology is dumbing us down.
I really think that is the case. It's too bad because now we're so, fixed to our iPhones and we're always looking down and we never pay attention to our surroundings.
That's right.
You miss out on a lot of really, really profound, amazing things.
That's right. Yep. This is way, way off topic, but last year I took a couple of days off and I couldn't use my phone or computer and I was jonesing for it. I was like crawling the walls for the first day, and then the second day I never wanted to go back to them again.
It's like a pacifier, I think.
Yeah. It does something to you chemically to check your email. There was some type of report about that, how it's almost like some type of addiction on how we need to keep checking our email or keeping in touch, when the world is going around right there and we were glued to it. We have a question up on the message board. Do you have any suggestions on equipment for the amateur observer, watcher, camera, lens, computer, etc.?
That's another great question, and we need more people like you because we need people that are out there doing it with good equipment. Anything with that, if you can get it at night vision, anything with the night vision is fantastic. I have a pair of night vision binoculars, Night Jaguar. I just love that name, that I am using right now. Those are great. You have to make sure you don't look at the city lights with them. I learned that one the hard way. But that's wonderful. It is incredibly difficult to take photos of a moving object at night. And so I have been working with our photo analyst here, trying to hone in on what I need to do to make that happen a little bit better. And so I will keep you guys posted on that as we learn more stuff. And Wilbur Allen has taken some amazing videos and photo. I'm hoping next week I can talk with him and just pick his brain about good equipment.
Yeah, that's it. This is the first time this has ever happened to me. I live on top of a mountain in Maine, and I don't know if the listener can hear it, but there's coyotes howling in the background. I've never heard that. This is the first time.
Wow.
It must be the government. Because I'm talking about UFOs now.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm actually way too relaxed tonight, so you're going to have to do the rest of the show.
Oh,
no, I'm just kidding.
That could be really frightening for you, I'm telling you.
So speaking of that, we have only a few more minutes. We do take a quick break. It's just a little, 5-second break at the top of the hour. But let's talk about your show that is starting this Friday.
I am so excited. It's called UFO Audit on KGRA Radio. I will be interviewing some of the top researchers in the field, like you, and also my goal and what I'm going to be doing is honoring a member of the community. And this Friday, I am going to be talking about James Clarkson, who's an amazing investigator. He's been with MUFON for a long, long time. He is the state director up in Washington State, and he's written a couple books, one specifically on June Crane. So it'll be fun to honor and talk about people that have made a great contribution in the field. Wow.
And do you have, I know what it's like, of course, to run a show, and, weekly guests, it's thick and thin, but usually people I've noticed in this field, because I used to do a podcast with comedians, and which was a lot of fun, I got to say, but booking a comedian is not easy, especially if they're a headliner or a name. Are you finding that you have guests lined up ahead of time?
I have been really lucky. I have been working hard, and I think because of the work I've done for MUFON, people have a good idea of who I am. So I have Peter Robbins, Denise Stoner, Paula Harris, Richard Dolan, and so I think it'll be great. I've got all of these wonderful people, and they're all people that I've developed relationships with and have a lot of respect for. There are many other people that I've found as well that are witnesses, experiencers, and these people need to have a platform to tell their story as well.
Now, tell us what station you're on. What's that station you're on?
It's KGRA Radio.
Oh, that's right, KGRA. I think I may have been on that for a short time, or I might be confusing with it. I was on one for a very short time, and I can't remember what the heck happened. But I'm sure you'll have a good run.
Well, we'll have to get you on there.
Well, just to back up a little bit, I believe you said that I was a researcher. I am not a researcher, just to let you know. But I just have, I guess I could be called an armchair researcher. But I just am into the topic. I enjoy the topic. I enjoy speaking to intelligent and interesting people and hearing everybody's thoughts on what could possibly be going on. That's what really keeps me glued to it and gets me excited to just hear different perspectives. And, it'd be interesting I would like for you to, I'll just throw this at you. If you'd like to just bring up the topic with Richard Dolan when he's on about where he stands now with the alien slides from May 5th. I'd like to know how he feels after the whole thing kind of crumbled. Some people saying it's not crumbled, but so we can talk a little bit more about that in the second half. We just have a couple of minutes left here, and I thought I saw. I thought I had a question up there, but it was actually a compliment to you, which is good.
I know, Phil. Thank you. You really made my night. That makes me very happy.
Well, I was telling everyone in the message room to be kind because I'll just leave it at that.
Well, they're being very kind, and I appreciate the support, and it's nice to have good feedback.
And if anyone would like to call in, we'll be taking a break here in a second, and it's a 603-967-4030. And so your show, how did that come about?
Since I have a background in music, and I've done all of this performing. I've done radio voiceovers, recorded lots of CDs. To me, it's a very fun, natural thing. And when I started to work for MUFON headquarters, I was doing some video things for them, and I have guest hosted the MUFON radio show, which I really love to do. I'm like you. I love to talk to people and connect and to allow people to share their stories. And so it just, one thing led to another, and then Race Hobbs was fantastic, and we decided to do the show, and here we are.
Wow. Well, I do have to say, you're very relaxing to talk to. You have a very nice voice, and so that's why I feel so relaxed.
Thank you.
Besides being unemployed. Yeah. Both of that. I'm not going to harp on that too much. Well, we're ready to take a little quick music break. Don't go anywhere. All right, we're back with Erica Lukes. And again, if you want to call in, 603-967-4030. And so, Erica, I can't remember what I said I was going to ask you more about in the second part of the show.
Oh, Lord. I don't even know if I should remind you, but it might be about Roswell, the slides.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you probably shouldn't. So I had made kind of a vow on the show, because what I did is right after that, I had a show just about the slides only, and then I said, okay, I'm making a promise to you that I won't keep talking about this. But you and I had a brief conversation during our sound check today, and you said that you speak with Jaime all the time. You also speak with Kurt Collins. So you're speaking to these people on both sides of the fence. Now, because of that, I'm really scared to ask this question, but I'm thinking I'm going to ask it anyway. What do you think?
Oh dear. I think that I'm kind of, it's amazing, because I don't know at the end of the day what will happen. I think for me, being in the role of the person that interviewed Jaime at such a volatile time was fascinating, because I had to do a lot of research. I talked to, I was fortunate enough to have a friend that was one of the foremost Native American historians in the world. And so I could talk with him about the burial practices of Native Americans. And then, I talked to so many different people. And I did talk to Jaime and everyone involved with the May 5th presentation. And I talked to Kurt, and I knew if I was going to do a good interview, I had to have both sides of the story, because, like we all know, the truth is somewhere in the middle. I do feel that Jaime did not get involved with this to deceive anybody. I believe that Tom and Don approached him with something that they were genuinely excited about, and the ball got rolling, and that's what happened. And there was, I will say that I kind of sat back and watched before the presentation. There was a very intense social media campaign that was taking place, and a lot of it was, in my opinion, perhaps maybe a little bit overzealous and unjustified. You know what I mean.
I was following that too, and I think that even the people on that side would agree with you, because there was a lot of talk. Like, for instance, Kurt and I had a discussion, that it did get a little harsher than it needed to. But I think people were really pissed off. They were angry that there wasn't real thorough research by a lot of people that would really know what was going on. Or, for instance, this whole thing about the placard not being able to be deciphered, blurred. That type of thing. Anyway, here I am. I'm going back on my word. I hope the listener will forgive me, because we're talking about it.
It's so good, though. I mean, this whole thing, the whole debacle, there's so many lessons to learn, and I think there's still a lot of information that hasn't been brought forth. To me, when I've talked to the people that were involved with the May 5th presentation, they feel that they did do a lot of research. From what I saw, they did as well. And I think somewhere along the line it got, I don't know if maybe the fact that there were so many problems with the broadcast, it wasn't broadcast in English, and so there was something that was definitely lost in translation there. But I think that at some point in time, there was so much momentum going that it wouldn't have mattered how much research was presented that was credible, because somebody was going to go down. Right.
Well, okay. So one of my listeners reminded me to stop talking about it. But it is. I do want to say this in closing about the subject, is that I think it was George Knapp, I'm pretty sure, is the one who said that ufology took care of itself. And it really is. There were people that really, really went hard to work on this. And, I think that was an honorable thing for them to do. Yes, there was some bashing, but still there were some people that did some honest-to-goodness work to try to figure out what this thing was. And, I have to tell you right off the bat, the very first instant I saw that, I thought it was a mummy. And I think there's got to be a lot of people that felt the same way. And I've done a lot of museum work, and right away I started looking at other elements, and right away I thought it was something in a museum. There's not going to be something encapsulated in something with adjustable shelves and glass, like a museum showcase. And anyway, all right, I'm done. And how about those Cubs?
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we're
that's all I
changing the
got
subject
on that
to
one.
baseball. Yeah.
Yeah. How's the weather? Is it good?
Well, yes. So, but anyway, have you known, getting back to just a little bit around the edge of that, have you known Jaime for a long time?
I first actually got involved with Jaime, and this is kind of a funny story. I was contacted by MUFON's executive director, and Jaime had said, hey, I found this great video of these orbs over Salt Lake, and I wanted to do an interview with your state director and see what she knows about the topic. And the video that the executive director sent me was one of mine.
Oh, really?
That I had posted on YouTube. I mean, it was just kind of funny the way it worked out. But so I worked with Jaime, and he got me in touch with some people here in Utah, and then did a few segments with regards to the sightings that we had here, which was, that's great. That's helpful to me. I know what I filmed. I know what I saw and what other people have seen. And so I really appreciated him for doing that.
Right. Now, I tried to get him on, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago, because I was really fascinated in some of the Mexico sightings that happened, like, for instance, during the solar eclipse, that some people are saying it's Venus, but I don't know what it was, but it was, they were seen all over the place and really interesting. And I did try to get him on the show, and I had a connection at one time with him, but it never went anywhere. He's a fascinating man, but I don't know. Without me getting back into the slides, I'm just going to move on to another subject.
Well, I think, it just, without, talking about the slides, I will say, just with regards to Jaime, my experiences with him have been positive. And I know several people that have grown up in Mexico, and they remember him as a child being on the air and talking about this subject. And so that's always a great thing. Anything that can build awareness and make the UFO phenomena something that is more acceptable for people to talk about, to me, that is a very important part of getting the mainstream scientific community to research this.
I do agree. I've seen many times another side of that, when someone is involved and then somewhere along the line there's a turn taken, or perhaps a story is revealed that one of their main things they've been researching for years ends up, not being so, or debunked, or another explanation is given, and they stay hard fast. I've seen this happen a number of times, and I don't think, I'd be really, really shocked if he changed his tack on this whole situation.
Right. Yeah.
I know you're being diplomatic, and I've already been told to stop talking about it on the chat room by someone. Leave you alone. So, and I will. So, we'll move on. Are there other people that you talk with regularly, like in the field?
I talk with Robert Powell from MUFON, who's the chief or head of the Scientific Review Board. I talk with Jan Harzan, our executive director, several times a week, and he's a really fantastic man with amazing experience. I talk to Ben Moss, who is a great friend of mine. He was on Hangar 1. Gosh, and Ron Regehr. I speak with him quite a bit. I know you were mentioning him. I was so excited. He was awesome.
Also, Ben Moss, I met him in Phoenix last year and really liked him. And he is the one who really inspired me to make sure that I was going to go to Ray Stanford's house, which I plan on doing possibly even next week. I'm going to try to go down there and do a live show from Ray's house down in Maryland. So I hope that works.
Keep me posted.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. Ben has worked so hard on that and forging a relationship with Ray. That's really, really neat.
Yeah. So I did meet him, and anyway, let's see. So you speak to all those people. Now, you mentioned just a minute ago that one of them was on the scientific review board. Can you tell us what that is exactly?
So the MUFON has the abduction research team. We have the scientific review board, and we have, Robert Powell is the head of the scientific review board, and so he and his team and their people on the review board from all over the world really vet the information coming in, and they analyze cases, Robert specifically, to look at the top cases, and then they're working with us with the Project Orange and the research that we're doing. They've written, in fact, if you go to the MUFON website, you'll see different papers that have been written by the scientific review board. They're amazing individuals, and it's really the foundation of MUFON.
Speaking of that, I mentioned a number of different shows here about Mark D'Antonio. He's the MUFON video photo analyst. Great guy. I consider him a friend. Recently, as the past listener has known, I've been talking about him having, he had a serious heart problem, and he's been in the hospital. I believe he still is, but he actually did a posting on Facebook the other day, which made me feel great that he's on the road to recovery.
Oh, that's good.
I don't know if you've ever worked with Mark, but he's a great guy.
You know what? He is, I have talked to him many times. He is a love. I really say he's been so kind and helpful. He's amazing at what he does, and that sums up a lot of relationships with people in MUFON. I really feel like I have met people that I will be friends with for the rest of my life. They're incredible.
All right, now I'm going to go a little conspiratorial on you this is the question I'm going to ask you in just a second on the message board. But some people claim that MUFON is a disinformation, or part of it is, and corrupt. Now, I'm not laughing at that statement, really. I'm just, maybe it's nervous laughter. But no, do you hear that?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. In fact, I'm from Utah, so I am, I'm taking up where Elaine Douglas left off. So, yeah, there's definitely the rumblings of people that have been unhappy with MUFON, and you'll always get the conspiracy. And who knows if there are people inside the organization that are disinformation agents. It's entirely possible. The thing I'm learning about this field is you never know.
That's right.
But I do think that MUFON as a whole has gone through a lot of changes. Most all of them are positive, and so hopefully that will dispel any of the negativity focused on MUFON.
Okay. Now, on the message board, can you explain or talk more about any Native American insight? That is something that I am really trying hard to look into with the help of my friend who is the Native American historian. He was up at the University of Utah for a long, long time, and he's in his early 80s. He's given me all of these amazing books about skinwalkers and about their oral traditions on things. And so I'm reading those, and I'm hoping that by doing that and becoming more familiar with the Native American culture, that will give me greater understanding. But then I can also
try to forge friendships, respectful relations where I can learn things and help them. And just, I think there's just so much to know. And we have, they're in a position where I think they're pretty closed off. Perhaps this is what I understand. And I think, and I don't blame them. And I think as long as I can hopefully prove that I'm respectful and I really honestly care and want to learn as much as I can about their culture. It's beautiful. It's fascinating.
Right. And you hear a lot of times they'll talk about, the star people and, traditions, oral traditions that have come down for generation after generation. And also, in, south of you, Arizona, there's a lot of drawings on rocks, early drawings that are pretty interesting in the Hopi area.
There are, and there are some in southern Utah as well. So oh my gosh, it's like you go down this rabbit hole and there's so many directions you could go. Being in Utah, the Native American culture is incredibly important. Skinwalker Ranch is actually situated in an area where you have the Ute tribe, and the Ore oil fields are on that Native American land. There are lots and lots of sightings up there. So is there a connection between that? I don't know, but I would sure like to find out, and I'll keep you posted.
Okay. Now, I saw on the message board you actually answered someone, but they were asking what a skinwalker is, and that is actually a good question for the listener out there. So go ahead.
So a skinwalker is a witch, and not necessarily, it's not a good thing, but it is this entity that can shapeshift. And typically, from my understanding, when a skinwalker is around, it's a bad omen. Bad things happen, and they are, it's mysterious. That, like I said, that's something I'm learning more about. But they have been spotted, and there are legends that they have taken children in the middle of the night, and so who knows? But there was a fellow, I was just at the UFO Congress down in Phoenix, Arizona, and there's an artist who was there, and I just talked with him for a while. He's Native American. He was telling me about an experience that he had with a skinwalker, and he was out late at night. He said that he just felt this cold wind and this energy rushing to him, and the thoughts in his head were, you are going to die. Are you ready for this? Are you ready to see me? And this is what you wanted, and are you willing to give up your family? So all of these terrifying thoughts came, and then he saw this apparition, and it was the most terrifying, profound experience he ever had in his life. And he just said to me, if you want to go down that road and you want to look into things like that, you better be prepared, because this is something that we have no control over, and it's not a good, positive thing.
Okay, someone wanted to know if peyote plays into the part of the skinwalker.
I think peyote might play a part in lots of things. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe even UFOs. Yeah,
it could. But Skinwalker Ranch and the Uinta Basin is a paranormal, is a hot spot. There are all sorts of things happening there. So you get the UFOs, you get Bigfoot, shapeshifters, you name it, it is happening there. Strange creatures. Why? I don't know, but I think when you start researching things, you realize that oftentimes this phenomena might go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's talk about that. I read the book. George Knapp and I have communicated a number of times, and he's just such a busy guy, trying to get him on the show to talk about that. And I'll even suggested, we can do a pre-record, anything to get him on. I really want to get him on to talk about that. What a fascinating book that is. And one of the things that struck me the most, I don't know why, but it does, is when all the scientists were there and they had their camera set up and everything outside, and all of a sudden they just saw this it looked like this hole appeared, and then this thing climbed out of it. You know, I mean, that is like, wow. You know, I mean, all these people witnessed that. And, you know, maybe I'm naive to think that it really happened when it may not have happened, but still, the whole thing is fascinating. Another unanswered, so to speak.
Well, I think there's definitely a reason why Bigelow bought that property and spent a lot of money with, you know, hiring the best scientists and bodyguards, security to go in there and study stuff. He's a very smart man. There was a reason, and I have a friend whose name is Ryan Burns. He lives in the property that is very, very close to Skinwalker Ranch and has seen very amazing things. I mean, we're talking strange creatures, objects, you know, portals almost opening up. And he's also had an experience, and I saw the slides when he was at a MUFON meeting a while back of men in black, men in suits on his property with equipment doing something. It was pretty interesting, pretty intriguing. I have a friend, a contact up there that will keep me updated a couple times a month, and there's been a lot of military activity up there as of late. And then the UFO activity also seems to be increasing from the reports I'm getting up that way.
Well, you know, when Phil, when the person on the message board was asking about the peyote, he was actually serious. He wasn't doing it, you know, to be funny or anything like that. Because now that's a cactus or something, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but it's been used for, I think, a long, you know, many hundreds of years, if not longer. But I don't really know much about it. Do you?
You know, I know that it is very sacred, and it opens up a part of your subconscious to many profound experiences. I have a friend that went down to South America to meet with a medicine man, and had, oh my gosh, and I wish I could remember the name, ayahuasca. I can't remember the name, but they went deep into the jungle and then took this substance and were gravely ill for a couple days, just vomiting, but then had these experiences that were just amazing. And she felt that it was allowing her to transcend different dimensions.
Wow. Someone was asking more about the portal on the message board, and you know, that was the thing that came up there. And I have heard that in the past, you know, about different like events. Like, I'm not sure if it's a UFO, but you know, a lot of times it would almost make sense the way they appear and disappear. You know, like, who knows, the end of a wormhole. I'm really going out there, you know, tonight, but all unexplained.
It is, but if you know, when that's part of the thing that I'm trying to look into is where are these objects appearing? They appear in specific places. Lots of studies with the MUFON Project Orange. Lots of, you know, going through the database back east, they're appearing near bodies of water. So are they coming in and out of these bodies of water? Who knows? But that the sightings clusters are pointing to something in that specific area. Right. So we'll see. I believe that perhaps maybe something is happening with ley lines, gravitational anomalies. There's something that. I don't know, but I would let you know, because I've got so many puzzles to solve, so many riddles to solve, and
well, it really keeps you know, this whole type of thing. It really keeps me really interested in the subject, because it's just, you know, the more you look into it, the more questions there are, and I don't think that we're really going to know the answer anytime soon. And if we do know the answers, it'll only be to some of the things. And for instance, if we know what UFOs really are, if they really are extraterrestrial, which I believe makes more sense than most of anything else. But there are still so many unanswerable things that go on besides that.
There are, and I think we are never going to find out the answers if we waste a lot of time deciding whether this, do UFOs exist? I think we ought to just say yes and move on with it. Like I was saying earlier, we have ample evidence, so we need to be proactive and really figure out why, where, how, and quit debating each other and work together. This is vital. Because if something was happening, it is, but it needs to, we don't know what any intentions are. And we need to just maybe think about a lot of different things and prepare.
That's right. Of course, you hear over and over again, if they were malevolent, then we would certainly know by now. We could certainly be destroyed many times.
Well, that's what we would like to hope. That would be good. And every day is a new day for me with that regard. Some days I think everything is happy and we're living in a world where we can all communicate and there's nothing, malevolent going on. But the bottom line is we just don't know.
That's right.
We really need to be prepared either way.
That's right. And, I did a pre-record that's coming up with a gentleman in Amsterdam named Gerard Artson. And the thing that we'll be talking about in that show is when that does air eventually is, he thinks that they are peace-loving and trying to keep us from destroying ourselves. And that does, there is a theme of that you do hear about in different circumstances. You do.
And for me, when I had experiences with the objects I saw, I felt very connected. I felt whatever it was quite benevolent. And those were my impressions. Whether that's the case, I have no clue. But even abductees or experiencers, at first these events are incredibly traumatizing, but then as their life unfolds and they learn more, they learn that these beings are really here to help the planet.
Right.
But, I don't know. We know so little.
Right. Yep. A number of things you hear about kind of dovetail that. Of people seeing visions, and I go back to the I want to say Papua New Guinea, or I know it was in Africa, of all those school children, what they were seeing and what they were feeling, was more feelings than anything else.
It was. And were you talking about with the with John Mack?
Yes,
and Dr. Mack, that was incredible. And
right.
And speaking of what a brilliant man, very brave researcher.
Oh yes, absolutely. And too bad he left us early.
That was interesting. It was sad, and he really was. He just did so much, and it was really sad. And Bud Hopkins as well. Right.
Yeah, interesting. Let's see. So again, if you're listening live, you can jump over to our chat room and pose a question. And I'll give the number out one more time if you'd like to call in. 603-967-4030. And have you ever thought, I know you read books, but I always, every once in a while, I think, does someone like you think about ever writing anything?
It's funny because I actually would love to write, and that's another creative outlet for me. And since I'm not doing as much singing, I'm not performing anymore, that I think that would be wonderful. And I have, I've written a lot of songs and done things like that, but I was talking to Nick Redfern actually, and he was encouraging me to to do that and said he would help me. And so actually Richard Dolan and I have had conversations about that as well. So I have all of these great people that are brilliant and will help me do that. And I feel very lucky. So perhaps you'll see something. Well, it might be a picture book, like the 2 pages.
Yeah, you said you were artistic, so we'll look for something.
I don't know. About that. I try. I'm actually trying to do a portrait right now, and that is kind of scary. I think maybe I have a great art for doing portraits of alien man babies. That are I don't know how that happens.
and it didn't start out that way, like in
Not
that
really,
stretching.
no. Nope.
Yeah. One of the things I'd noticed about Nick Redfern is he puts out a ton of books, and I can never understand how people can be so prolific in their work like that. It's amazing. And how to come up with a fresh new idea or story. I've had him on a couple times. I'm sure you're going to have him on. Hope to have him on again.
Yeah, he's a really neat man. And I don't know how he does it either, because my Lord, he has done a lot of things. In fact, he just was kind enough to send me his new book, and he is going to be on the show in the middle of August. So we'll talk about that.
Now, if I remember your radio station, I may have it confused with another one, but will they allow you to do a podcast out of that?
You know, that is something I just need to look into. But what I'm planning on doing, and I've got the green light for this, is I will be doing videos of my interviews. So you'll be able to, do a little screen capture, and you can see both parties communicating. And then I have videos as well that I've done at different events. And I've got a great interview with Steve Bassett, Nick Redfern, Lynn Kitai, and those will be on my website, the UFO Audit, as well.
I tried to. I actually thought of doing what you're talking about, like a screen capture type thing, and it just, with what we are doing here, it's audio is just the real important part of it. So I'm probably not going to do that. And I did note that I would do a Google Hangout with people, and I tried a Google Hangout once on the show, and there's a little bit of lag. I don't know if you've ever tried any of that, but
no.
Yeah, so I'd be a little bit cautious.
Okay.
So moving ahead, no questions up on the message board. So what would be a good topic to talk about?
Well, I think Peggy was talking about a good UFO story.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so I had a lady who called in the other day. She lives in southern Utah, or she filed a report, and she was, she's about my age, just watching the events outside, hanging out, talking to her sister on the phone, and she notices this white pulsing sphere outside of her house, and then she sees a helicopter that is just not moving, and this helicopter is observing this object as it's moving and kind of churning and bubbling. And she was, she told her sister, I've got to get off the phone now. This is something really incredible is happening. And the helicopter observed the object for some time, and then she said the orb appeared to almost fold into itself and then was just gone. So after talking with her, I realized, we both realized, and we started talking about the orb phenomena, and she lived in Salt Lake and told me about 2 other instances, one specifically where she was on a freeway on-ramp, and 2 of these orange orbs were, a couple hundred feet away from her car, and they basically, the freeway traffic on the on-ramp was stopped, and people were hanging out of the car looking at these objects. She said the light and the color and the energy coming off of these objects was intense and unlike anything she'd ever seen. And she just watched these objects move together, move apart, move around each other. It was really quite a phenomenal experience for her.
Now, getting these orbs, we've discussed them quite a bit in the show so far, and one of the things when I was talking with Terry Ray back when, he was saying, that he watched these orbs have the same sort of, I guess you'd call it, flight pattern or pattern. And that's kind of what you were seeing earlier, but someone on the message board wanted to know if that sighting was close to you, like was there a long distance, and did you have any fear when you actually saw these things?
I didn't have fear. I had just an amazing sense of, it was beautiful. It took my breath away, and somehow I felt very connected to what was going on, and it was almost as if, this object was saying, okay, here I am. I had another, during this 2013 summer, I had other events, one specifically where I was driving home on the freeway, and I looked up on the hill close to my home, and I noticed this blue object, and it was so strange. It was up in the mountains. There were no roads. And I thought, okay, is that a hiker? What kind of light is it? It's somebody with a laser pointer. And so I kept driving. And as I moved past a mountain, I looked back up, and the object was now on a different mountain. And I just thought, okay, that is really bizarre. So I did what every good investigator would do. And in fact, I wasn't a MUFON investigator then, but, I went and got a taco or a burrito or something. And then I came home and I was outside just watching a lightning storm and trying to take some photographs of it, thinking that was strange. I'm going to write it off. And I looked up the mountain straight up from me, and I could see that object and another object. And they were right there. And I will say that I was at that point very unnerved. And I did take a couple pictures of those objects. And I went home or I went into my house, and I called my friend, and I just said, I'm afraid. You've got to calm me down, talk me off the ledge. I don't want to go to bed tonight. And yeah, that was an interesting experience. And then to top it off, not to be, reading too much into this, but I didn't sleep well that night. I left for work the next day, and I was driving out of my little area, and a black unmarked helicopter flew right over the top of my car, and it scared me to death. I've never had an experience like that. So it was 24 hours of some really intense things, and whether they're related, whether I was reading too much into things, I don't know, but it was definitely, that was a series of odd events.
Wow. The organizer of, this is a question on the message board, the organizer of Project Orange has a theory on what the orbs are. Do you agree or disagree? My gosh, I think that I do agree. And if you're talking about the organizer, I put the research project together, and I enlisted the help of Terry Ray because I heard him lecture, and I knew about his book, and I just knew I needed him to be a part of this. And so Terry and I reached out to Robert Spearing, who had also done a lot of research. Terry believes that these entities are, obviously intuitive, not from here. I have to say that I am inclined to believe that as well. About that.
These are from our case reports, these are intelligently controlled objects. But I guess we will just let the data speak, and we'll try to find out as much as we can and educate the public as we do that.
Let's see, up on the message board, do you ever have dreams about UFOs?
I think that I have lots of dreams about UFOs, and I've always had really vivid dreams. It's that only child thing, but I have, and I think dreams are so cool. They're so fascinating, and lots of times I'll write down my dreams. I like to dream journal.
Until we started talking about this, I forgot all about but I've had like a repeat dream that I look up in the sky and see like hundreds of UFOs, and they're like, wow, what are we going to do? You know, are we being invaded? You know, that type of dream. I've had that in a few different ways, and I'm never feeling good at the time in the dream.
No. Oh, my gosh.
It's rather nerve-wracking. I really, when I had a brief sighting, I should say, and when I had that, I never had any fear. There was no fear involved. It was just like, what the heck? That's, I don't know how to describe it.
That's good, you know, because I just was asked to be on the abduction research team for MUFON, and boy, a majority of these people that have had experiences are very terrified. So if we can have, you know, nice experiences, that's great.
Yeah, exactly. Now, speaking of experiences and experiencers, what do you hear in your state about people that are describing abductions? Or is that something you don't really hear about?
You know what? We don't have a lot of people that are really talking openly about or filing reports in Utah. We have had a few that have had experiences. I hope that changes. I think with abductions, people are still so very scared to come forward, and society is not kind to people that do. And I hope we can change that, because this is an area that needs serious research as well.
I do, yeah. You know, I had a hard time. I have a hard time sometimes thinking that it's as vast as people are claiming it is, but I don't know. You know, because it seems like it's tens of thousands, you know, constantly, and yeah, it's kind of like when I was saying earlier about the more you look into it, the more questions you would be having, and why would they be generational? Why would they possibly follow someone if they move to a different state? Or, you know, I mean, there's just more and more and more questions.
There are, and it's interesting because I actually did an abduction investigation up near Skinwalker Ranch, and it was 3 generations in a family. Mm-hmm. That was, and the grandmother was in her 90s and started having experiences when she was 5 years old. That was fascinating, and with this type of thing, you have to listen to the witness and basically decide whether they're credible, rational human beings. There's not a lot of physical evidence to go on, but we can just keep studying it and hopefully learning more about abductees and what the patterns are, because there are patterns there as well.
You know, a lot of times you think of abduction beginning with Betty and Barney Hill, 1961 or whenever it was. But when you do hear about people saying, yeah, you know, this person's in their 80s or 90s, and they think they've been having this experience. And, you know, someone looking at the skeptical side would say, oh, yeah, well, they just passed it down, you know, the stories down to their, you know, children or whatever. You know, I'm sure there's always that side of it. It's another mystery.
Yeah, it is. But and there are always people too that, and this is very, very few people, but people that want attention, and you know, but that doesn't happen very often, because at the end of the day, who wants that kind of attention?
Right, exactly. Someone wants to know how you decide what information is reliable and useful, and what is rubbish or unreliable.
It's a lot of research. It's a lot of doing. You know, when I get a case, I will look to multiple sources. So I'm checking different databases. I'm also looking at the sighting and reaching out to other state directors or field investigators that have had similar case reports. So I'm doing that. And then, you know, you have to look at the weather data. You have to make sure you are checking to see if it's not a man-made object. There's so many things that go into it. And then also there is a sense of intuition. Is this person, you get pretty good at discerning somebody's character. Is this a hoax? There's a lot of things that go into being a good investigator, and I am still learning as much as I can from all of the people that have been doing this for much longer than I have.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a big part of it, is learning from those who started before you. I wouldn't think that there would be a high amount of hoaxes as far as people calling in reports. Is that true or not?
I have not seen a lot.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of a time-consuming process to file a report.
Right.
And to go through all that. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you do get people. I have not had a case in Utah where somebody has been hoaxing something. I'm sure it will come up. But gosh, if you're that bored, I don't know what to tell you. Well, get a life, maybe. Speaking with
Peter Davenport, he does, get some call-ins. But you're right, when it comes to actually writing a report, who's going to take the time and energy? People are only going to do something like that if they can get a lot of hits on YouTube by creating, a hoax video. Third phase of the moon. I'm going to put that out there.
Oh, come on now. Say it ain't so.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's part of that, but for the most part, someone's not going to put the energy into it. But one of the things that does come up a lot is, drones and Chinese lantern. Those are the two things that we really, as people out there are investigating, they really have to discern what a witness is saying when it comes to these things.
They do, but I will say, since this is a passion of mine, that I do believe people are unfortunately jumping to the conclusion that things are Chinese lanterns, and they are missing really, really good cases. Chinese lanterns obviously, follow the wind currents. They don't last very long. There are all sorts of telltale signs that it's a Chinese lantern. Most states have banned the use of Chinese lanterns because of the fire hazards.
Right.
So, I think that the Chinese lantern theory, hopefully with the Project Orange, will maybe not become as easy of an out for people.
What about drones? Do you ever get any of that through your state?
I have a new person that is training to be a field investigator, and he has worked for the military. And I asked him that very thing because of the sightings that we've had over the Salt Lake Valley, and he said that it absolutely will not happen. That the military, it is illegal to fly drones here. And I asked him, well, we've got these sightings over the valley. Would the military be testing anything over populated areas? Absolutely not.
Right.
So, there goes that. If what I've seen is not a drone, and I would think that's, I don't think that's what a majority of these people are seeing.
Now, there are, the personal drones, the little 4-bladed ones that you can activate off of your cell phone, stuff like that. I'm sure that there's a lot of things being seen out there, but mostly those type of things are more in populated areas that they're being used, or there's actually some film drones. Now, I don't know what's legal and illegal to use. I'm sure it has to do with probably size, perhaps, or where they're being flown out. I don't know any of the regulations.
Well, I have to tell you a funny story. I have a neighbor who has a drone, and it's really, really super cool. And he is a photographer, so he'll use it for that. And he knew I was having a little MUFON meeting here.
Oh.
And so this is the best story ever. But we were all sitting on the back deck, and we're quietly telling these stories, and it's intense. And all of a sudden, my neighbor flies his drone right over the patio and just to see the look on people's faces. It was the funniest, 2 minutes of my life. And I'm pretty sure that he had a camera on the drone, and I'm sure he was over in his driveway just laughing. It was...
Oh, funny.
Well, that's the little things in life that make you happy. So
Yeah. Now, going back to MUFON, you're the director. There's only eight or so sightings a month that are reported. How many investigators are in the state?
Right now, we have got 5 investigators, but we still need more. And even though we only have 8 sightings, there's so much that we could be doing in the meantime. We have to go out and talk to law enforcement and build relationships with them so we can get information. We do have reports of cattle mutilations consistently in some of these areas, like the Uinta Basin. So all sorts of stuff can be done. And we did have, on October 2nd of last year, we had a mass sighting here and in Colorado. And that made national news. That was a pretty big deal. So that is still being investigated, at least here in Utah. The theory was for a while that they were Google Loon balloons, but my thoughts on that have been there was no transponder data, and these objects were seen over the NSA, which is the most highly restricted airspace in the world, over populated areas and in the flight corridor for the Salt Lake International Airport, which would be a huge safety concern. So lots of things weren't adding up. The fact that these objects were stationary for over an hour at a time and then moved incredibly quickly. It's a great case. So I have made a FOIA request. I have twice from the FAA received data that it is unreadable. So maybe at some point in time we'll get the information, but in Utah, that is still a big question mark.
Now, how many people would you say witnessed that approximately?
Oh boy, I would say in Utah there were at least 100 people. I mean, I started getting calls from the media that afternoon, and Fox 13 News just said, hey, what's going on? Our message boards on Facebook are lighting up. We're getting phone calls. People all over the Salt Lake Valley are seeing these objects, and they want to know what they are. And at that point, it was just kind of scrambling and trying to figure out if I could see anything on flight radar and making phone calls. It was really great because the next day they were seen in Colorado, and over there were cases where these objects were seen with jets pursuing them, military jets.
That's something you hear about quite a bit. I've known some eyewitnesses that have had that same story. One up in Canada, the whole party, a group out on his deck, they all watched this disc fly by with 2 fighter jets on its tail. You hear about that a lot, and it's so curious to me why you don't hear the pilots eventually talk about them, them actually doing that. I've never heard, except for the case in Iraq or Iran back in 1974 or whenever that was. You don't really hear about the pilots that were pursuing.
You don't, and I think having a couple friends that are actually still in the service, it's not anything that you talk about because of all of the fact that it's you're risking your career. Right. And you do find commercial pilots are a little bit better now at talking about things, but there's still a big stigma there.
Okay, Erica, we only have a couple minutes, about a minute, just over a minute here. But one of the questions that was on the message board is, do you suppose it's possible that the lack of reports in your state have anything to do with religious beliefs?
That thought has crossed my mind. That's a great question. I think that there might be some correlation, but I think honestly, at the end of the day, it's just the fact that people don't know where to go to report it. And when I have had case reports, there have been people that have been of the predominant faith, And so I don't know. It's a great question, but I'll keep you posted on that.
Yeah, that often I would imagine does have. We have something up. This is a total different message board from my producer. Coming up, an update from Richard C. Hoagland on today's released image of Pluto on Sky Watchers Radio. That's next, right after this show. We have. I think that's going to wrap it up for us, Erica. Do you have a website?
It is the UFOaudit.com, and then I'm on Facebook, and you can go to the UFO Audit as well.
You know what? I'm sorry to do this, but I'm going to have to cut you short. This is Martin Willis, and I want to thank everyone for listening to the show. I want to thank Keith for producing the show, Peggy for our Facebook page, our guest, of course, Erica Lukes. And thank you, the listener, the most important part of the show. We'll see you next week right here on Podcast UFO and the Dark Matter Digital Network.